In this episode, turtles practice bum breathing, whale fall is people, and we talk tech with special guest André Pineda. Welcome to Fax Machine. Hello, everyone. My name is M. Costa, and I'm here Zooming alongside my co-host, Rob.
Hello.
Rob, you want to take another crack at that?
Yep. There was a lot of beer in my mouth. I think you could audibly hear the gulp.
Yeah, I definitely did.
Okay.
Rob.
Hello.
And Noah.
Hi.
Fax Machine is a podcast created by and for people who are curious about everything, but especially the things that make them laugh. In accordance with that, we have a science comedian on as our guest today, and that is only one of his many titles. Science comedian, PhD, in the same lab as our very own Noah, or coming from the same lab as Noah, and now currently a scientific advisor at a law office looking at patent and intellectual property stuff and making sure that companies don't steal knowledge, I guess, from each other. It's Dr. André Pineda.
Thank you. Thank you, Em.
Welcome to the show.
Thank you, Noah. Thank you, Rob. Thanks for having me. Yeah, I liked how did you phrase it that I was like protecting knowledge? I feel like I'm a guardian of like a cave with a scroll in it or something, the way you put it.
I feel like I was just kind of trying to describe my perception of your job, and it was just kind of like guardian of
I liked
knowledge
it.
and
I mean,
patents.
knowledge is power, so really I have the most important possible job that you could have, which is defending the knowledge.
There you go.
I'm picturing you at work, kind of like, I forget Idris Elba's character in the Thor movies, but like, you just control the
Heimdall,
gate.
I think so, yeah.
Heimdall, yeah.
I will take an Idris Elba comparison any day, so yes. I am basically the Idris Elba of therapeutic, technology, I guess.
Nice.
I'll take that like tiny thing.
Yes. Oh, and I mentioned at the top that you are a science comedian, and that's because while we were in the, I guess not caveat trenches, because while it is a below ground venue, it is a very lovely place, and trenches does not make it sound as such, but you shared the caveat stage with us on various occasions, running a show there, wherein you invited panels of experts to sort of explain the science behind various films. They were awesome, and
thank you.
Maybe when caveat returns,
maybe
that can come back too.
Yeah, I feel like there was like a before times and an after. Like in the before times, I was a farmer and I grew science comedy, but ever since everything died, now I don't know. I mean, now I'm just guarding this cave of knowledge and not really doing anything else.
Yes,
so.
The great entertainment drought that we've been in.
Yeah, so maybe in the future again I'll do more science comedy. For now I'll stick to the I guess it's just the science side.
That's right. There will be no comedy today. Don't worry.
Okay, good.
If you were afraid that you would laugh, you can just stay right there.
Yeah, he's sworn off it completely, so it's not going to happen.
And I am turning it all off now.
Okay, good. That gives me a way so I can edit around you being funny.
Thank you.
Great. Well, on today's episode, André is joining us for a little bit of extremophilia. So we are going to be sharing facts about various organisms who have learned to adapt to conditions that, quite frankly, are not easy to adapt to. And they're not only surviving in the unsurvivable, they are thriving. So we're going to give them a shout out with our various facts. And at the end of the episode, a quiz loosely inspired by our theme.
I love a metaphor episode. You know what I mean?
What?
Persevere!
It's like organisms adapting to a terrible situation, coming out stronger on the other side.
Beautiful.
Totally. Yeah. And I was definitely going to wrap the quiz being like, if these poor critters who can barely survive normal existence can face the day, so can we.
You have to edit in like a swelling musical score, as you deliver a speech.
Totally.
Nice, absolutely. All right, Rob, take us away.
This week I learned about the hottest bacteria in the world. So I'm here to tell you about a little bacteria called Thermus aquaticus, which is really, it's, I believe, Latin for hot water, exactly. And the reason that this bacteria is so important is because I think everyone on this call has a pretty tight relationship with or one of the products of this bacteria. And so Thermus aquaticus, or as it's abbreviated, TAQ, T-A-Q, which is an abbreviation of its binomial nomenclature, part of it is in every laboratory, every molecular biology laboratory in the world, probably. So this has to do with something that I think we're all really familiar with in 2021, which is the process of PCR. Something I wouldn't have said 2 years ago, but now you hear on the news all the time the importance of PCR for detecting strands of DNA, for viral detection, and for basically surveillance of COVID. This test, this assay, is not that old. It was only developed in the 80s, and it relied heavily on the protein contributed by TAQ. So why, how, who, specifically, you'll find out. Okay, so when you want to look for little bits of DNA, you have to do something called amplify it. Usually there's not enough DNA to run the test you want to do. DNA has this cool property because it's double-stranded that you can heat it up and the two strands will fall apart. It'll melt, essentially. And then, if you use the right tools, little bits of DNA, the bases, will assemble. They'll self-assemble on the half strands, and you'll put together two new strands of DNA. So from 1 you get 2, from 2 you get 4, 8, 16, etc. And you can get exponential growth or amplification. This was a really good idea. This was a revolutionary idea in detecting little bits of DNA. Unfortunately, heating something up until the DNA melts and then cooling it back down also usually destroys all the little molecular machines that you need to do it. And so the protein that we really rely on is one called polymerase. Which is kind of named for its very mythical Latin idea of making things, putting things together, to polymerize something. And humans have this. We use it in every one of our cells to make copies of our DNA, to make mRNA. But if we heat it up, it's going to break apart. This is one of the reasons that fevers can be so detrimental. Hot temperatures break down proteins. And so if you want to use these little machines that help us to do the process of PCR, you need something that's temperature stable, but humans weren't going to be able to create that. Introduce the team at the University of Indiana, who in 1969 was scouting around for extremophilic organisms. They went to Yellowstone National Park, where they discovered TAQ bacteria.
Wait, were they on vacation or for work at Yellowstone? Because I would definitely say as a lie that I had to go work at Yellowstone. But just go to Yellowstone.
They're like, those guys have been out of the lab for weeks. Where are they? And they come back and like, oh, we were collecting bacterial samples.
We found bacteria at this bar. That's really exciting.
Yeah. I think they were both, what would I call them? They were bacterial spelunkers. They were looking for, I don't know if that's a real term, but.
If not, it should be, and it is as of now.
I feel like it describes the magic school bus when it shrinks down.
Bacterial spelunker.
Yes.
That definitely encapsulates it. Capsule. Bacteria joke. Anyway.
Nice.
Anyway, they went to Yellowstone National Park, and Yellowstone is famous for geysers, right? Big, hot spring geysers. And the temperatures there can approach 90 degrees Celsius in the water. And they said, it's crazy to think that anything would be living anywhere near here. And so when they sampled it, they were as surprised as anyone to find not even one, but 2 species of extremophilic bacteria living in this 90 degrees Celsius water, which is close to 200 degrees Fahrenheit. So they found this incredible bacteria, Thermus aquaticus, and I just have to take a second to say who found it. It was the team of Thomas Brock, and I'm not kidding, his partner, Hudson Freeze.
Wow.
Is he a super villain?
Right? Just
wait, who was the first? Thomas Brock.
Thomas Brock.
Hudson Freeze sounds like a superhero, and Thomas Brock sounds like their secret identity.
A little bit.
I was gonna say
the
Hudson
alter ego.
Freeze sounds like a very unlikely like environmental event in New York.
People used to ice skate on the Hudson River. It was a thing that would happen in the
Oh,
winters.
the old Hudson Freeze skate.
Yep.
See, I felt like it sounded like a hipstery brand of like spiked seltzer or something.
So many
Freeze.
possibilities here.
And it's really just an epic name. And unfortunately, he is the far less famous of the two scientists. Thomas Brock actually had like a very successul career and like has his own Wikipedia page. And Hudson Freeze is...
Have you ever seen them in the same place at the same time?
Brock,
There might be a reason.
Brock, take off your glasses. But Brock is actually, for what I'm about to tell you, is considered one of the scientists who opened the floodgates to biotechnology as a field. Brock basically characterized this TAC bacteria. And so the optimum temperature for it to live is about 75, 80 degrees Celsius. It can survive for more than 2 hours at 93 degrees Celsius. It can survive for 40 minutes at 95 degrees Celsius. At 98 degrees Celsius, it can last about 8 minutes. It's an incredibly durable bacteria that can literally be boiled without even, like, not falling apart, like, without losing function. It can survive and come back and be fine. Which means that the thing that its proteins do, the machines inside this bacteria that make it work, including its polymerase, are super temperature stable. So if you're a scientist trying to heat up your DNA so you can make copies of it, and you're worried about the machines, the little proteins you're using falling apart, you use this bacterial polymerase, and it doesn't fall apart. And all of a sudden, this cycling process to amplify DNA is sustainable. It can be done over and over quickly. It doesn't take minutes to change out your water baths and add new solutions. And molecular biology as a field takes a huge step forward. So this happened starting in like the 1980s. But the other thing that came out of this discovery was the person who basically took TAC polymerase, put it into this process, and made what is now the PCR that we hear about in the news, was a scientist named Kary Mullis. He won the 1993 Nobel Prize in Chemistry, and he's the only scientist, I believe still to this day, who received the award for work done at a biotech company. So most scientists who win the Nobel Prize, especially in chemistry, do it in academic positions. And this was work done exclusively, and not in collaboration with a university, all done at a company known as Cetus Pharmaceuticals. I'll talk a little bit more about Mullis in a second, because he is a supremely weird character in the history of science. One other thing that I think is interesting, because we have André here, is that after Brock and Hudson Freeze took their bacteria, they studied it, they noted all the cool things about it, and they entered it into the American Type Culture Collection, the ATCC, which is where scientists today will order cells. We'll go in and say oh, I want these cells and these cells, and they literally just took a sample, submitted it, and then it's there. It's in a essentially free. It's in an open library where you can get these cells and everything about them. And the scientists at Mullis's biotech, Cetus Biotech, started buying them and then using them for PCR and then patenting them. And it was called, and I want to get this right, the Great TAC Ripoff by the National Park Service.
Wow.
Oh, boy.
And so Brock was apparently a scientist funded by the National Park Service. He looked up bacteria that were in the national parks, which is where he found TAC. And the Park Service said, hey, we discovered this heat-stable bacteria. We deserve some of the proceeds from every PCR that's been run ever. And they got nothing. They literally got $0. But so this is cool. If you work for the Park Service now as a bacterial spelunker or any type of scientist, you sign a benefit-sharing agreement that says a portion of any proceeds earned by your discoveries have to go back to the Park Service. And I don't really know how that's enforceable, and maybe someday, André, you could teach me all about it. So Mullis did very well out of the company that created the modern PCR. And I want to spend the rest of my fact just talking about Kary Mullis. And I think when I told you, Emily, that I was doing this fact, you told me, you have to look this guy up.
Yeah, it's endless gold there.
Yeah, and I knew, a little
his biography.
bit. I'd heard some weird things, and I knew that I was, that there was, a little red flag in my mind next to the name, but, I had no idea. And so Kary Mullis received a doctorate, left science to become a fiction writer, was wooed back to the University of Kansas on a fellowship, and while he was doing his postdoctoral work, he owned and operated a bakery in Kansas for 2 years, just because he had too much time in his hands.
Feel that, or
Yeah.
that desire anyway.
Yeah, and as someone who like had one foot out the door, like managing swim teams, like while I was in grad school, I get it. Like I'm not against him yet. I'm just impressed. But so he had a friend named Thomas White who worked at Berkeley, and Thomas White said, "You are really smart. Come do research." So he worked for a little while at UCSF, and then it was Thomas White who basically landed Mullis a job in the biotechnology company at CETUS. And so CETUS is also the Latin word for a whale, which is an extreme organism in that it's very, very large. And I just wanted to make that connection while we pass through. While at CETUS, Mullis earned this awful reputation for having erratic behavior. He once threatened to bring a gun to work. He was in a lover's quarrel, actually several, with different women. His ex-girlfriend, who he was dating and had just broken up with at the time that he, I would say, invented PCR or like imagined how PCR could work. And in his Nobel acceptance speech, he talked about how even though he figured out this process that he knew was going to be worth billions of dollars, the day he discovered it, he was still sad about his ex breaking up with him, which is like really sad.
That's life, man.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Maybe, there's hope for them yet. They might re-anneal.
Make little copies of themselves.
Yeah.
You just got to wait for things to cool off a little bit.
Yeah, exactly.
And so, yeah, he had this reputation as being like very erratic, kind of temperamental. He nearly came to blows with other scientists at a work staff party. Basically, no one really enjoyed working with him, but no one could deny that he was a genius thinker. And he obviously won a Nobel Prize for imagining and developing the process that is our modern PCR. And PCR, if I haven't said enough, has been described by biologists as the birth of Christ event in molecular biology, that we talk about life before PCR and life since PCR, and the calendar of molecular biology is centered squarely on when it was created.
I always love to think about how it enabled sort of the field of archaeology to actually like be able to sequence and study like trace and ancient specimens of DNA, because that was the kind of thing that we could not do at all before PCR, where you just had like this scant, like barely intact DNA sample from like a mummy or a mammoth or an ancient organism that you just needed to have enough to work with in order to be able to actually study it, and PCR allowed us to do that.
And it's totally right to say that like the movie Jurassic Park and the novel by Crichton wouldn't have a grounding in science without PCR, but kind of more importantly to the time in kind of real life, the 1980s is the time that we kind of think about in public health as the HIV epidemic. And that outbreak, one way that it was started to be curbed was through accurate viral testing. And that's impossible without PCR, as we know now. And so the confluence of the creation and the mass production of PCR testing materials and detection of HIV, which curbed the outbreak's spread, it's kind of an inevitability now, looking back, that PCR prevented a much worse spread of HIV. But like, it's not really given credit for that, but it was invented in the early 80s and it grew as the epidemic did, and it was able to kind of help stave it off while antiviral technologies were being developed. So I've said a lot of good things about PCR, because PCR is very good. Said a lot of things that Kary Mullis did that are impressive, and I've started to allude to the fact that he's a little erratic. And so everything here is true, but so we'll start with, in 1992, Mullis founded a business selling pieces of jewelry that contained amplified DNA of deceased famous people, such as Elvis Presley and Marilyn Monroe. So you could get like an amulet.
Is there like a website where I could find? I mean, someone could find those.
Oh, I'm sure. Well, now I bet they're worth so much because they were like, cease and desist ordered out of existence. But like, what a super weird idea.
And it's kind of crazy because you could have done that before and like just lied about it, and nobody ever would have been able to find out unless they had access to PCR. So he created the very thing that put his much more lucrative like DNA amulet business out of business.
That's so true. Okay, so Mullis did that, which is questionable, not great. He also he studied, I guess, in a loose term, he looked at the ozone while writing a grant proposal. And
Just looked up.
he's like,
Yeah, I think I know what's going on there.
Is that a hole? I think I
No.
see a hole. Yeah.
and then he was like, no, it's not, because he
Great.
firmly denied that there's a hole in the ozone, that there's a problem with human. Basically, he went from being like, I don't think the ozone is in trouble to I deny like anthropogenic climate change wholesale.
I'd love to learn more about anthropomorphic climate change.
It's just a giant person rubbing their hands together very quickly to heat up the earth. That's exactly what it looks like.
The earth is just like, whoo, it's hot in here. Like, but so big climate change denier through the end of his life, which by the way was August of 2019.
Well, I have to say, when I was like, hey, look into the guy, that was because the little that I had heard of him, just anecdotally, because, you know, when you do PCR, a lot of people are like, hey, did you know this about PCR on occasion, was regarding his belief in UFOs. So that was what I heard. And I was like, oh, that's kind of quirky and wonky. The bit at the beginning where I was like, oh, man, let's hear about this. My enthusiasm is sense-tempered.
I won't even mention his belief in astrology strongly or his curiosity in UFOs, both of which are well documented. And so that's how we got from one little microbe to Carrie Mullis in this.
Giant microbe.
A big germ.
This week I learned that one of the best ways to survive being trapped under the surface of a frozen river is to take a deep breath through your ass. Really gives new meaning to the term aspirate.
I'm gonna need some coaching on this.
Okay, don't worry. I've got you. I'm going to explain everything to you. Don't worry. But first of all, look, all the best things in life are frozen, right? Margaritas, daiquiris, pina coladas, frosé.
Don't ruin these things for me.
Yes, the mere concept of a frozen liquid is enough to bring a smile to one's eye and a twinkle to one's mouth. Sorry. But even the staunchest pro-ice partisan must acknowledge that there are times when ice is inconvenient, like when you slip and fall on a patch of ice, or when icicles loom precariously overhead, or when you get trapped beneath the surface in an iced-over lake or stream. That is the situation that some turtles, such as snapping turtles, find themselves. But they still have to breathe, right? How do they do that? Since they can't get to the surface to inhale air into their lungs, our lung researcher might take personal offense to that. Sorry, Em.
Heard worse.
They instead use a very special ability called cloacal respiration, by which they pump water into their cloacal orifice, or the cloaca. I don't know why I said it like that.
just to make it worse.
Yeah.
So they pump water into their cloaca by contracting muscles in their inguinal pocket. And then that water then travels to the cloacal bursae, which are a pair of internal pouch-like structures.
It keeps getting worse.
And in the cloacal bursae, there are long fimbriae, which is the site of gas exchange, and I think works, basically similar to that increasing surface area, so you can sort of get dissolved oxygen across like a membrane, basically.
So they've got ass gills?
They have ass gills, yes.
I was going to say ass-violi, but that works too.
Ass-violi, that's great too, yeah. They have ass-violi and their ass gills.
There you go.
First of all, just in case anyone doesn't know what a cloaca is, in many organisms, a cloaca is basically a unified orifice through which excretion happens, but also like reproductive activities happen at that site. We actually, I think, the guest on was Dustin our last episode, or the two episodes ago?
Yeah.
So I'll just say, yeah, Dustin has a cloaca. No. So a guest we had on recently, Dustin Growick, likes to refer to the cloaca as one hole to rule them all, because he's a dinosaur enthusiast expert, and he gets asked questions all the time about how dinosaurs would have had sex, and they wouldn't have been that different from any other of the birds or reptiles that exist that have cloacas today. So that is the way he deals with that question. But I don't know if any dinosaurs had this ability to breathe through their butts underwater.
And we may never know. Sadly.
Unfortunately, we may never know.
I'm also really curious, just who listens to this show. If you didn't know what a cloaca was, could you call in and tell us? Because we want to know who you are. After 50
my instinct
episodes,
was to welcome them and be like, "Oh, first-time listeners,
we
welcome."
totally. I assume this is your first time here.
I feel like inviting someone to call in to be like, "You didn't know what a cloaca was, you fool, you butt breather."
We promise not to berate you if you call us. Just to put that out there.
Where would they call?
I don't know.
Send us an email, God.
We'll use the same hole for calling and for emailing. So.
Oh no. Okay. Well, look, some turtles do this quite efficiently. And so there are some that can basically, I mean, turtles, they have to breathe, right? They have lungs, they have to come up for air. But some turtles can do this behavior efficiently enough where they can stay underwater for like 30 minutes at a time, which is not bad. You try holding your breath for 30 minutes and you'll see it's pretty impressive. I don't know if there are any people who can do this other cloacal breathing thing, but there are other turtles, such as the Fitzroy River turtle, which is actually also known as the bum-breathing turtle, that can actually do this for like up to 3 days. And so they have this extraordinary ability. They basically like 70%. I'm not sure. It says like 70% efficiency. I don't know if that's like extracting oxygen or like relative to what they would be breathing air through their lungs. But apparently they're quite good at it. And apparently like a lot of other, especially reptiles and amphibians do this. You may have noticed that this isn't necessarily an extremophile in the sense of like the extremophiles that are like just microbes, which is usually what people talk about, or even like tardigrades, which we'll get to in a little bit. But because of that comparison, I just have to note, this is hardly anything to write home about in extremophile terms. So there's a group of extremophiles which are called psychrophiles, or alternatively cryophiles, and they are extremophiles that are capable of growing and basically thriving at low temperatures, typically ranging from like -20 Celsius to +10 Celsius. And they're usually found in places that are like permanently cold. So such as like, the poles and like the super, super deep sea, not touching a thermal vent, the places that are cold in the deep ocean. So what's amazing though is that still other extremophiles are capable of surviving extraordinarily low temperatures if they have to. So these aren't necessarily psychrophiles. These are just incredibly resilient extremophiles. For example, the tardigrade, which has been observed to survive for up to a few hours at temperatures that are near absolute zero. Like, I think it was like 272 Kelvin. I'm sorry, negative 272 Kelvin. That 272 Kelvin is really hot.
That would be,
or no, maybe it's not very hot.
It would be one Kelvin, I think.
Maybe
minus
minus 270 Celsius.
Yeah, sorry, minus 272 Celsius. That's what I meant, like very close to 0 Kelvin. Thank you for the correction.
It's
sorry.
It's okay.
Well, in Celsius, I'd say it's a negative.
Very good. No more? No, we're good on Celsius and Kelvin jokes? Okay.
That's Fahrenheit.
So in addition to that ability to survive after spending time near absolute zero, they can wake up after having been frozen for as many as 30 years, which is crazy. And there's a tardigrade scientist who's a biologist.
Wait, hold on. Is the scientist a tardigrade? You have to clarify here, please. I'm very excited.
How many armholes are in the lab coat?
A little bit of both. All right, he's a tardigrade scientist who studies tardigrades, which, when you think about it, is not that weird. We're all humans who study humans, so so it's not so strange. All right, give him space in academia.
Makes sense that a doctor would be studying tardigrades.
I don't get it.
No Doctor Who fans. Okay.
Like
it was a very,
TARDIS.
very lame. Yeah. I
Oh,
didn't think it would
TARDIS
land.
grades.
Oh, I should have said TARDIS grades.
You still
All right.
can.
We're gonna blow past it. It never happens. We're gonna go back in time.
We're gonna
before
travel
that joke
to- yeah.
happens. There we go. Perfect. Carry on.
But look, okay, so this guy whose name is William R. Miller is a biologist at Baker University in Kansas, and what Miller wanted to emphasize is that like they are incredibly resilient and have these like very interesting abilities to withstand like crazy and stressors, but they're not they're by no means like invulnerable. Like there's a difference between being like just like nothing can pierce you or whatever, and like being able to sort of go into hibernation if it gets really cold. And Miller said, the illusion that these animals survive with a cryptobiotic plan is just dead wrong. We work with active animals and they're quite easily murdered. We kill thousands of them every day.
I will just cop to when I started working on a science bus for kids where we show them cool things. I was like, we need tardigrades. And everyone was like, no, they don't stay alive. And I was like, you fools, they're immortal.
Tardigrades are famous for staying alive in crazy situations. They can't survive on your bus.
Literally, like, have bought tubes and tubes of tardigrades and can't keep them alive for more than a week. Like, It is so frustrating.
But speaking of like records for being frozen and coming back, the 30 years that tardigrades can do pales in comparison to what something else we've actually mentioned on the podcast before, which was nematodes that were found in like Siberian permafrost, and they were frozen for 42,000 years, and were like revived. And so the question is like can they achieve this? Because when things are frozen, you know, it's strange to think about, but like when you're in a block of solid water, the one thing you can't buy if you're an organism trapped in that block of ice is water, like free water. And so what a lot of these organisms face is like desiccation, basically being like dried out and not having any water just sort of around all of their biology. And why that's really important is that basically all of this, you know, the stuff that's happening within the cells is sort of just expecting there to be water around. Nothing really works without it. So like, you know, proteins
it's the
that
solvent of life.
It's the solvent of life, exactly. And like proteins that are meant to just kind of float around the cytoplasm or have any face that touches any water molecule only like retain their structure and don't like aggregate into sort of non-functional, you know, things that just gunk up the works if they're in the context of water, and that's something that you lose in the ice. So what some of these organisms that have this ability to survive this do is they have basically cryoprotectant molecules like a sugar that André will recognize as soon as I say it, and that is trehalose. And I just wanted to shout out trehalose because basically what it does is helps replace.
It's listening right now.
Right, trehalose.
Freaking out.
Trehalose, please write in.
Please check out Trehalose' podcast. It's fantastic.
Yeah. But so what trehalose does basically is it helps replace that need for water by having sort of like little side groups that are similar enough to water to help like fill that, you know, need for that molecule so it doesn't just freak out and aggregate, basically is the term for it. And it also, another thing it does is to sort of bind up water, and so it doesn't like completely go away in the water that these cells can like actually access. And the reason I bring it up, and I mentioned that André would recognize it, is that André and I actually published a paper together that used this concept in a disease where there was some mutation that prevented a protein from folding correctly and having its correct structure. Trehalose was able to basically perform that same function that in, you know, like a frozen nematode it might do, and sort of like position itself over the part of the protein that didn't want to be exposed to water and protect it from aggregating. And I felt like, for having this guest, we had to bring that up.
That's awesome.
Giberson and Pineda et al., one of the greatest papers of 2018.
Yes, everybody's reading it. I've heard it's all over the internet.
So trehalose is basically going to be the next like diet sweetener that we're going to see everything like Coke with trehalose. Like it's like you get the agave bottle that has like a little worm in the bottom, but instead of agave,
it's like tequila with a C. elegans at the bottom. That's so funny. Well, I mean, the terrible thing is that there probably is C. elegans in all of your bottles of everything you drink. They're everywhere.
I don't want to hear this.
Actually, another one of the molecules we use that works quite similarly to trehalose is a sort of a sweetener in like gum. I think it's called sorbitol.
Oh, sorbitol, yeah.
Oh,
it's
yeah.
a low-calorie sweetener.
Yeah.
And also why, if you chew excessive amounts of sugar-free gum, that can also give you diarrhea. There was I think it made the news for being wonky a few years ago, but there was like a case study that was published of like this patient suddenly had like crazy diarrhea, and turns out they were a flight attendant and would go through like multiple packs of gum a day to pop their ears.
Oh, pop
as they
their
were on
ears,
planes.
yeah.
Oh wow.
Yeah, so there you go. Don't chew too much gum.
Also, for flight attendants, chewing gum has been positively linked to flatulence.
Yeah, but that's from like breathing
That's
in
breathing.
the air when you chew.
Oh,
Right?
when you, yeah.
Imagine
Right.
chewing gum, and it turns out that it makes you like. That's not on the label. That's like it's like one of those Orbit commercials gone horribly wrong. How does your mouth feel? But how does your butt feel?
Yeah, it's more like oh shit.
Oh my god. Yeah, no Surgeon General warning for that. Jeez.
What are some gum brands that we?
Big Brown.
I mean, bazooka. You don't even have to add anything. It already describes it all.
Juicy
Like
Poops.
a bumzooka.
Juicy Poops.
No.
Disgusting.
Oh my
No. How do we always get here?
Nevertheless, the bum-breathing turtle of the Fitzroy River encapsulates the importance of air to our survival. That since we are not extremophiles, we must do whatever it takes to protect and preserve our environment. And in another sense, these animals serve as a reminder that when the water gets above our heads and things get hard, and of course by things here I mean the surface of the water, it's worth taking a moment to reflect on the situation and to take a deep breath in through your ass and out through your ass.
This week I learned that there are obligate photosynthetic organisms, meaning living things that require light to survive, that live in the deep oceans where there is no sunlight. So how do they do that? Well, let's go on a journey of discovery together. I'll guide you through. So first I want to talk about ecosystems. So what do you think about, this is an open question, what do you think about when you think of an ecosystem?
I think about
What does that mean?
a bunch of organisms and living together in their interdependent lives and the environment in which they live.
I literally picture a lion, a tree, a giraffe, and a worm.
Yes. Yeah, I'm
wow,
basically the
best
same.
answer.
Wait, Emily, what do you think?
My
Ecosystem.
my response is basically the same as Noah's, but involves more flowery language of like coexisting in harmonious balance and
Cool.
something
Well,
like
yeah,
that. Ideally.
I had a similar idea to all of you guys. So when I think of an ecosystem, I think of an environment where a bunch of codependent organisms live. And so it starts with the sun shines down on everybody, and then the plants gobble up the sunlight, and then some little animals like eat the plants, maybe like a deer or like a rabbit, and then something cool like a wolf or like a lion like eats the little animal, and
Right.
then that's the circle of life, and that's it.
Yeah.
And so ecology is very
it
simple
stops
and easy.
at the wolf.
Yeah, no, the wolf is immortal. The wolf never dies.
I feel like you've taken the side of like the cigarette company here by saying the wolf and the lion are cool.
Are
I
they
don't know
not?
why.
Are they not cool? How I have tattoos all over my back of wolves, eagles, and lions. So I hope they're still cool. There's also a moon in there.
Did you just get that like lone wolf t-shirt tattooed on your stomach?
Oh, you know about that T-shirt? Yeah.
I was gonna say the only way to
Howling
answer.
at the moon.
Yeah.
Well, really, the only way to answer that is whether they can all be on a raft crossing a river at the same time.
Right. Well, you have to separate the sheep and the
You do
grain,
that.
and yeah.
Exactly.
But yeah, these are the kinds of animals, those kind of organisms that we imagine. Things that are kind of dependent on sunlight because they live outside. But it turns out that the idea of ecosystems all starting with energy from sunlight is total bullshit pushed by big sun.
Sun.
So in reality,
It is a big sun.
it is. It's the biggest. It's bigger than any corporations on Earth, that's for sure. So its lying potential is just tremendous.
I was going to say it's a huge monopoly because they just keep fusing.
Yeah. Also, the business is just handed down from father to.
No.
I'm glad. Okay, yeah, we all agree. I'm glad we're on the same page. I thought I'd have to convince you to hate the sun with me, but I'm glad you're already against it. Good. Screw the sun. The sun is the villain of my story. So in reality, you don't need sunlight to make an ecosystem. So a lot of food webs get energy provided by sunlight, but there are also lots of producers that are not photosynthesizers. So the main alternative to getting energy from sunlight is getting energy from chemical reactions of organic or inorganic molecules, and that's called chemosynthesis. And the organisms that do chemosynthesis are called chemotrophs, and generally they're bacteria or archaea, so they're tiny little itty-bitty single-celled organisms. So what can a chemotroph eat? They can eat hydrogen sulfide, sulfur, iron, ammonia, molecular hydrogen, and other things that you and I probably would not survive on, but it works for them. So anything they can oxidize to steal an electron from, and that's what provides energy.
I think we should say, in case we have any very trendy listeners that are thinking about going on like a hydrogen sulfide diet, as like the new paleo. It's
right.
like,
Oh no!
Please do not. We did not.
The Cambrian.
The Cambrian diet.
Even older.
I'm trying to fight this Cambrian expansion. You know what I'm saying? You gotta.
It's a good disclaimer. Do not try this at home. Everything we talk about is done by professional chemotrophs. So please just listen to your doctor. So these chemotrophs, because they don't depend on sunlight for energy, they don't need to live out in the open. They can live in weird little armpits of the world where you would not expect life to exist. So I went on a little tour of global armpits, and I'm going to share some of these armpits with you. So,
okay. Thank you.
Okay,
Excellent.
all right, butt person, you don't have any grounds to talk about my fact being gross. Anything is permissible in this fact. So one weird place to live that I think is really cool is a cave called the Mobile Cave in Romania. And it's been isolated from the outside world for 5.5 million years. So no interaction ecologically. So it has its own super weird ecosystem. And it gets energy not from the sun, but from methane and sulfur that get oxidized by bacteria for energy. So those bacteria feed other bacteria and fungi. Those are eaten by animals, and those animals are eaten by other animals. And they have a whole dark world going on independent of sunlight. And the environment is crazy also because it's separate from our environment. Has low oxygen, high carbon dioxide, high methane, hydrogen sulfide, ammonia, and basically it's like living in a hostile alien planet compared to what we're used to. And as if that's not weird enough, I want to read you a list of some of the species that live in the Mobile Cave. I feel like it was made up to be specifically like creepy animals in this creepy environment. And there are only a few dozen species like known to be in this cave, so it's not cherry picking, like they're just all weird. So there are leeches, spiders, pseudoscorpions, wood lice, a centipede, a water scorpion. Like imagine stumbling into this cave and like the environment is toxic, the air is toxic, the water is toxic, it's completely dark, and everything is like a leech, a spider, or a scorpion. But also, I feel like it would be a great like prison or torture chamber to throw somebody into. It's like a mini Australia basically.
I love it. One of those was pseudoscorpions too, and that based on the environment, I imagine those to be worse than like real scorpions, which is just a whole nother level of terror.
Yeah, I don't know what a pseudoscorpion is. I threw it in there because I'm sure I don't like it.
Yeah.
all the scorpions were like, this guy's just not up to snuff, and they had to like kick him out of the scorpion club.
This guy's too weird for us. Right.
Yeah.
He's got too many legs.
He's scaring the children.
That's kind of similar to how Ragnar Lothbrok, the Viking, legendary Viking. No, nobody else knows about Ragnar Lothbrok.
Oh, do you know this Viking, guys? Everyone knows this Viking,
he's an extremely famous Viking. He's like the original Viking.
Noah, just because you are a Viking doesn't mean that the rest of us know your culture.
I am not a Viking. How dare. But I think at least in the legend of his life, he was like thrown into basically like a pit of like, I think it's asps. So it's kind of like Cleopatra in the Shakespeare play, but instead of like, poking yourself with an asp, it's like you were killed in a pit of asps. So very clearly the difference that is exactly what it is. But I kind of imagine that's like sort of it was like basically like a well supposedly of all these like snakes, and I don't know, maybe they were terrible insects and like pseudo scorpions. But it was in Northumbria in England instead of Romania, and I think maybe that's why there weren't as many terrible creatures.
Yeah,
I don't know what that means.
Romania is lousy with pseudo scorpions. That's what I learned in this fact that I made up. So the mobile cave, that's one cave that was discovered in the 80s. So, which is like pretty recently for a cave that's 5 million years separated from the rest of the world. So I imagine there are any number of caves like it that we just haven't discovered yet because we haven't dug down into them. So there's who knows how many ecosystems full of weird life that lives completely without energy from sunlight. Another interesting ecosystem, which is actually relevant to something that Rob brought up earlier, which I don't think he expected, is an ecosystem that forms around what's called a whale fall. Which is exactly what it sounds like, actually. When a whale dies and it sinks deep down to the ocean floor, it's basically a huge buffet for everything that lives like deep in the ocean. Because there's not a lot of energy to come by in the deep ocean, and the whale has a ton of energy in it. And because it's very cold in the deep ocean, the whales decompose very slowly. So there's a lot of opportunity for different species to gather around the whale table and to eat like different parts of it. And this can last literally for 100 years, eating one whale. So it's a pretty significant ecosystem that forms just around one whale. So you get around one whale, you get different ecological stages, different niches that different organisms fill. So for example, you start with scavengers, like certain sharks will come in and munch on the big meatiness, all of the most kind of obvious parts, probably like what we would eat. And then
the big meatiness was my nickname. They called me the big meatiness.
Well, sharks would have loved you, is what I've learned.
Yeah, they probably would. But they can never catch me. Fuck you, sharks. This goes out to all the sharks out there. I dare you.
You foiled them by having your ancestors evolve to move on land. That was a long plan.
Somewhere, somehow, some sharks are at like a drawing board trying to figure out how to make their legs into like mechanical little legs. It's just a picture of me with a big X through it.
There is a lot of meatiness on land that sharks cannot get to, and I guess that's what Sharknado is all about.
Yes,
equitable distribution.
That's what they
meatiness.
ended up with when they couldn't figure out the legs.
That's what they came up with.
The strategic Midwest meatiness stores that have been hidden from sharks for generations.
The strategic meaty reserve. The meaty strategy. I don't know.
So that's step one. All right. A whale provides plenty of meatiness for all these sharks, and then they finish that, and that takes about like a year and a half. And then after that comes smaller animals that eat up the bones and all the kind of organic matter that has fallen off of the whale into the surrounding area. And that takes a while. And years later, there are bacteria that can come in and they can break down lipids that are inside of the whale bones. And at this point, I want to take another little biochemistry detour. I'm obviously biased a little bit towards biochemistry. And we've talked about photosynthesis, where you get energy from sunlight and you use that energy to build a carbohydrate molecule, which is kind of a storage for energy. And an alternative to photosynthesis is chemosynthesis, so use a chemical reaction to get energy and build a carbohydrate molecule. And then the opposite side of that equation is breaking down a carbohydrate to use its energy for something else, and that's a process called respiration. So for us and for most kinds of life, we use oxygen for respiration, and we emit carbon dioxide and water. But a lot of organisms don't need oxygen, and they respire using other molecules, including perchlorate, iron, uranium, nitrate, sulfate, carbon dioxide, and a range of other things. So if you ever hear anyone trying to sound tough, just know that there are bacteria that breathe iron or uranium, and you'll never be that tough. So don't even try to compete with them.
I would really love for a professional wrestler to take on the persona of one of these extremophile bacteria from a heat vent or a whale fall or something. Be like, oh, I breathe iron. Can you respire? I don't actually watch professional wrestling, so I don't know if this is how they talk, but this is the vibe I get. It's
I'm picturing a large sweaty man in front of a metabolic reaction chart, explaining to everybody how he processes, reduces, and oxidizes these molecules. So we talked about photosynthesis, chemosynthesis, respiration. What does that have to do with the dead whales we're talking about? Like I was saying, there are bacteria that break down the lipids, which are fatty molecules, inside of whale bones. So to do this, instead of respiring oxygen and producing carbon dioxide like us, they respire sulfates and produce hydrogen sulfide. So for most living things, hydrogen sulfide is extremely toxic. And they're like, please stop making hydrogen sulfide and throwing it everywhere, you crazy bacteria. But for chemotrophs, they're like, are you going to finish all that hydrogen sulfide? Because that is delicious. I'm going to use that hydrogen sulfide for energy instead of sunlight. So for the next 50 to 100 years after the whale falls, these sulfate-breathing bacteria are munching on these lipids in the whale bones and spitting out poisonous hydrogen sulfide. And these hydrogen sulfide-eating bacteria are eating that, using it for energy to make organic molecules. And then those bacteria are food for other animals, and the ecosystem builds up off of that. So this is not the sunlight and rabbits that we needed right now, but it is the whale carcass and poisonous bacteria that we deserve.
Nice.
A whale fall is like a larger example of a main way that animals in the kind of deep, dark ocean get energy, which is by eating the falling pieces of all the fish and other organisms that died far above them. That's called marine snow, which I think is a very disgusting term.
I like it a lot.
Like, imagine if our snow was like pieces of dead birds and bugs like drifting down upon us, and imagine if that's like what we had to eat to survive. That is life in the ocean.
I think I think our snow is a fair bit of bacteria, actually.
Don't want to know this.
Isn't it like this might be like insane propaganda that I like accidentally invite, but isn't there a theory that like a lot of snowflakes nucleate around the bacteria?
Yes.
Bacterium?
Yeah, they need like a solid particle to form ice crystals around, right? And then bacteria in the atmosphere do that.
So bacteria are one of the putative nucleation things in clouds, including like particular types of dust and like non-organic things. But like, yes, there's definitely bacteria associated with snowflakes that are like in clouds. Which I think
so think about that next time you stick your tongue out to catch one.
I never do.
And
I vacuum up snow
and
with my vacuum cleaner. Get rid of it.
And we've also on Fax Machine established that shooting stars are just pieces of astronaut poop at re-entering the atmosphere. So.
Yes.
Some shooting stars.
Everything is poop with you people. So, yeah, dead animals falling in the ocean. That and like surviving on that is life in the deep ocean. Sunlight can't reach significantly below 200 meters in the ocean, and average ocean depth is 4,000 meters. So in most of the ocean, it's dark. There's no real sunlight. Therefore, life at that depth can't get new energy. Or that is what you would be saying if you hadn't been listening to what I was saying about chemotrophs. But you know that you are probably asking us right now into your phone, can't bacteria just like eat some random shit that's at the bottom of the ocean and like make an ecosystem around that? And basically, yeah, they can. So there are other sources of energy at the bottom of the ocean besides sunlight. And I want to tell you what the most important ones, which Noah also mentioned, which are called hydrothermal vents. And hydrothermal vent is a good name, I think, because there's water and it's hot, and the hot water comes out of a vent. So hydrothermal vent, easy to remember.
That's nice. Yeah.
It's so simple, even I can remember it.
I like it because it's exactly what it is. It's not euphemistic, unlike marine snow.
Marine snow is clearly like, it's like Soylent Green. Marine snow is people.
Marine snow is people. That's gonna be the first Fax Machine T-shirt that we sell. We're gonna put that on our website. And we're gonna make one for the fans.
You just have to have like a cartoon
Marine
fish
snow
saying
is
it.
people.
And then it's,
Oh my God.
factually accurate.
Our online shop was born in this fact. Thank you, Andre.
It's our mascot. It is named Charlton Fishton.
Yeah, marine snow is people. Hydrothermal vents are hot water. So the vent is a fissure in the ocean floor into the crust of the earth. So it's kind of like, a volcano. You have magma coming out of the earth, except instead of volcano, it's water that has gone into the crust is coming back out extremely hot and angry. I assume. I don't know. For context about the temperature around hydrothermal vents, so water at the bottom of the ocean is extremely cold. So it's like around freezing or just above freezing. And water coming out of a hydrothermal vent can range from 60 degrees Celsius to 460 degrees Celsius, which for the Americans is about 860 degrees Fahrenheit.
Wow.
But because of
Holy
the super
cow.
high pressure, it doesn't boil. It doesn't turn into a gas. It stays in liquid form, even though it's 460 degrees Celsius. Or if it's not liquid form, it's a supercritical fluid state, which is just a very, very high pressure liquid. All this heat being produced basically gives organisms the opportunity to live in a temperature of their choosing. You have very cold water outside of the vent, very hot water inside of the vent, and you can choose a range in between. Like Rob was saying earlier, there are organisms that live in different ideal temperatures, and having this big temperature gradient lets organisms that normally wouldn't have the opportunity to choose a good temperature for themselves. And water coming out of these vents is also grabbing like minerals and chemicals from underground, from like rocks under the crust, and spitting them up into the ocean, providing chemicals and minerals that wouldn't otherwise be there. So there's iron, manganese, sulfur, hydrogen, methane. And I know what you're thinking, delicious. This is all great food for chemotrophs. And
Did you say mango knees?
it's nothing more refreshing than biting into some mango knees. And similar chemicals to these, or different versions of these, can be also refreshing things to respire for other bacteria or archaea. So we've talked about the difference between chemotrophs taking energy from these things and other things respire using them. So basically it's paradise for things that live in just a completely different world than we do and use different resources than we do. And just like any ecosystem, because there's a producer to turn energy into organic material, there are other levels of organisms that eat those, other animals that eat those, and it becomes a whole underwater party. So hydrothermal vent ecosystems support clams, mussels, snails, crabs, fish, octopuses, and so on, out of the energy that chemotrophs produce out of these vents. A lot of animals that live close to hydrothermal vents, if not most of them, are symbiotic with chemotrophs and basically keep them close so the chemotrophs eat up the toxic sulfide coming out of the vents and use that energy to make organic molecules. The most extreme example of this is the giant tube worm, which can grow up to 3 meters long. So this is a big old worm.
Yeah.
But
Tubular.
it literally doesn't have a mouth or a digestive system when it's an adult. How does a 3 meter long worm get like nutrition without a mouth or a digestive system? Well, they have a special organ called a trophosome, where they just store a bag full of chemotrophic bacteria, and the worm is like, yo, here's some tasty sulfur and some oxygen I got for you, please make me some carbohydrates. And the chemotroph is like, great, I love sulfur, I'm going to eat this. And then eventually the worm probably digests the bacteria and gets that energy back. And so again, this is just to give you a sense of scale of like how much energy is being produced just off of these chemicals being pumped out of these vents, that you can have 3 meter long worms surviving off of them without a mouth. Wow. So here's another success story.
Wait, just a question. Do you think that the tube worms, there's bacteria that live inside the organ, and then they sort of digest the food, and energy gets stored in either just inside the bacteria or in more bacteria, and then at the end of the line, it just kind of like shaves off the top of the bacteria that it needs to eat and like keeps the whole thing going? Do you think the bacteria are aware that what the tube worm is eating is actually them? No. Bacteria is people!
You go any and every direction with this joke because everything eats itself. So here we have a success story of an ecosystem surviving and thriving without access to any sunlight at the bottom of the ocean, thanks to chemotrophs. But it turns out there's even more to this story, because in addition to the delicious chemicals being spewed out by the hydrothermal vents, in addition to the heat radiated from inside of the Earth, there's also a tiny amount of light radiation here. It's not much, but it's enough. They're actually obligate phototrophs, organisms that have to use photosynthesis to survive, that live near hydrothermal vents at the bottom of the ocean with no sunlight. They're just little bacteria, so they don't know that a hydrothermal vent isn't the sun. They're just like, oh, free photons. This is a good place to be. And these bacteria that they discovered here near the vents actually can survive on near infrared light, which is like the Pluto of light. It's barely light. It like doesn't even count as light. I don't know. It's at the extreme end.
It's like,
but that's how
light, kind of.
It's light, exactly. If it were in a can, it would be like light zero.
The idea that I feel like the way you described it made me think of these bacteria as being like enamored with the vent. Like you're saying they don't know about the sun. Imagine if they saw the sun.
That's what I was honestly, I had a Disney movie just playing in my mind of like just like the little bacteria that got carried to the surface and was like, wow, and like saw the
This is
you know
like
what I mean?
the Little Mermaid
think
for
of-
bacteria.
I want to be
Under
where
the
the
sea.
photons are.
It made me think of like Romeo and Juliet, like what infrared light through yonder window breaks. It is the vent, and the vent is the sun.
I'm uncomfortable. Much like things that live outside of the sunlight, but are they? So we've learned this fact.
Why did you say that then?
Just to make the segue, only to undermine it immediately.
It's much like things that live in the sun. Of course it isn't, though.
Look, I'm taking our listeners on an emotional roller coaster that goes straight to the bottom of the ocean, where we have thriving ecosystems that don't rely on the sun. So we've learned that chemotrophs and phototrophs can actually live happily without the sun, and they can serve as the basis for a whole sunless ecosystem. Now, of all of these weird places in the world I've talked about, where ecosystems thrive, fueled only by sulfur and dreams, sound like weird alien environments. They should, because there's a popular hypothesis that ancient life on Earth started in hydrothermal vents, which are theoretically capable of providing the energy and the material to create organic compounds. And then hydrothermal vents also can be a good environment for the first chemosynthetic and the first photosynthetic organisms to evolve in. And maybe even more importantly and relatedly, it's possible that hydrothermal vents exist on other planets and like moons in our solar system. So there could be crazy, complicated alien ecosystems out there that look nothing like what we're used to seeing, the cool wolves and the rabbits and deer and trees that we talked about. But these hydrothermal vent ecosystems actually do look like life we have on Earth. But if we're going to recognize them, we have to protect and learn about the exotic environments Earth already has to offer and the amazing life in them. Or in other words, we do have to go chasing whale falls and don't stick to the rivers and the lakes that we're used to.
All right, so we have arrived at our quiz. So, since we just learned a bunch about organisms surviving and thriving in hospitable environments, I'm going to break rank from all of that and quiz you on animals that, in ultimately pretty typical, sometimes even pretty cushy living situations, to varying degrees, just cannot. Just can't do it.
It's like,
Have
like
a really rough
Lamo-Files.
time. It's like, oh, bud. And I will say, I mean, like, there obviously are reasons for this being the case for them that are not entirely in their control. In some cases, they've gained maladaptive traits evolutionarily, or perhaps they were perfectly well-suited to their lives until some humans showed up, and then they were less well-suited after that. But needless to say, all the animals in this quiz are now just kind of terrible at existing. In some cases, despite our best efforts and interventions. It actually reminds me of a quote that I first said on the pod at our first live show, roughly like 2 years ago now, from Jurassic Park, of course. Life finds a way, but this quiz will show that way is not necessarily the best one. Okay, so question 1. This animal, which perhaps sucks more than any other at doing the bare minimum to not go extinct, is also...
Oh, come on.
is also
Better not be that one.
Is also shown the logo of the World Wildlife Fund.
There's your pandas.
It's the kind of thing where obviously I have to have a panda question. Like, there's just...
That just sets the tone. Now people understand the level of organism we're talking about.
where we're coming from. Yeah.
Do y'all know about the why the panda is the World Wildlife Fund logo animal?
So it wouldn't get out of the shot when they're trying to take a picture.
Get out of the way, man!
Move!
Damn, panda keeps playing with the camera.
Aren't you supposed to be mating right now? Get out of here.
No, it's because it's one of the few black and white animals that they could basically put on without color printing.
Yeah.
And they saved, I think it's some absurd amount of money just with all the various things that they've produced over the years by not having to do that.
That's
Yeah,
really
that
interesting.
was
So it was
an
either them or
alleyway
like
question.
Dalmatians were going to be the World Wildlife Foundation.
Yeah, basically.
Those are the options. Zebra's too complicated. No.
You didn't
Too
like
much
my
involved.
parakeet design? Sorry, Dan. It's just not gonna.
It's just
Yeah, we're between the panda and the resplendent quetzal.
okay. So pandas, I gotta do a quick rundown of why truly they can't do anything right. So they spend upwards of 14 hours a day eating 26 to 84 pounds of bamboo. Why? Because they can only digest 17% of that bamboo. Why? Because they don't have the kinds of gut bacteria that can digest cellulose, which is a molecule that is present in like a lot of plants. You know who else doesn't have bacteria that can do this? Us. And you don't see us eating nothing but bamboo. Not to give Joe Rogan any ideas. But apparently, based on science, their gut microbiota are actually better adapted to a carnivorous diet because of their evolutionary ancestors from way back when. But about 7 million years ago, they became plant eaters, or more oriented towards eating plants, and have just very stubbornly stuck with it since.
I'm just imagining like the animals they used to eat evolved into plants, and they're like, "We won, we won. You die now."
Must have been it.
Listeners, that's not how biology works, but it's a fun thing to think about.
Yeah, absolutely.
Ultimate victory.
Yeah. So we know of pandas best in terms of like hearing about them in zoos or in captivity, and that's because they're on the verge of going extinct and have been for some time. And they were first propelled towards extinction from normal things like habitat loss and destruction, and basically have been kept there because they can't procreate even if their lives depend on it, and they actually do because they're nearly extinct. So in the wilds, mating rituals between pandas last weeks, and females are only fertile for a few days of the year. So the way it plays out is that males kind of duke it out while a female looks on from high up in a tree. And then after a while, she comes down and like picks her fighter/suitor.
Choose your...
Pretty much.
I was gonna say, this is like
You're a
me
panda.
playing a video game.
And then they kind of struggle to copulate because the male panda's machinery is on the petite side. But in captivity, it is even more of a struggle. It's thought that because this kind of like sort of fighting part of the mating ritual doesn't play out, that females turn a lot of males down. In captivity, we're just like, I'm not convinced. You should leave. But also like, and generally like these animals get really disoriented in captivity, and oftentimes males don't seem to know what they're doing.
Maybe they should start like play fighting, like acting out these crazy scenes. And it kind of reminds me of how the WWF, didn't they make World Wrestling change their name or vice versa or something?
Yeah, the WWF
so
became
maybe
WWE.
So they should merge, is
right,
what you're
and
saying.
yeah, they should have merged, and they could have solved everybody's
Oh,
problems.
damn.
Get a panda wrestler in there. I think it's time I go carnivorous again.
Oh, but see, now I'm imagining because, like, you know, people who care for pandas in captivity are very careful to try and, like, keep them alive or, like, favor that as much as possible. So I can see them hesitating to have, like, two males duke it out. So now I'm picturing, like, a human trainer, like, dressing as a panda and, like, play fighting a panda.
Unless they train
Being
them.
like, oh, he's got me pinned. Oh, he looks really attractive right now. Oh, no.
Oh, and his situation down there is not miniature at all. Or whatever you said. I forget.
Yeah.
I can't remember what euphemism you used.
I said petite, but yes, that's essentially the issue.
Oh, sick and old. Ah.
Oh my goodness. But, and just to cap off, even if they do manage to do the dirty, pandas typically only have one cub at a time, and if they have more, they abandon the other one. So
my
great.
God.
And a baby panda is the size of a stick of butter when it's born, so like it's
What
really
a weird
tiny
analogy.
and weak. No, but so you can picture it. Like pandas are like gigantic, right? And then a stick of butter, that's its baby.
Yeah.
Okay. And so yeah, it's tiny and weak. Occasionally they get crushed by the mother because they are butter sticks.
They have
and
the consistency of like warm butter.
they just melt away. So even once they're born,
It's like the raccoon with that cotton candy in the water. The mother's like, no, 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 no.
Oh, the baby dissolved again. Time to go back to the World Wrestling Foundation.
But yeah, all told, pandas are very finicky. It costs zoos millions of dollars to just keep one, and keep it alive and try and get it to reproduce. And yeah, they're not the best. They're cute, but it's not enough to save them. Okay, despite how hard we try. All right, question 2. So what animal, now extinct, gained its name from being, to its disadvantage, fearless?
Gained its name due to its apparent fearlessness.
Yes.
Or supposed fearlessness. Okay.
Yeah.
The flying squirrel.
My first thing was like honey badger, but that's like
Still
not.
going.
Oh, actually,
Excuse
maybe it is
me.
because they go in for bees.
It's not extinct.
And they,
No,
like,
but they're still
you know,
around. They're not. It was extinct.
Oh, you said extinct?
Yes,
I'm sorry.
yeah,
I only
yeah.
know
I really
one
didn't hear
extinct
that.
That's totally
animal,
good.
which is the dodo.
It's
Is it
that.
the dodo?
Oh, well, they guess that's true.
Yeah.
I
So to
exhausted
kinda-
my one answer. It's all on you guys now.
That's perfect. Yeah, so to kind of hearken to all those quotes about courage and stupidity, that was what I meant by that. But yeah, so basically, the poor dodo. Now, those guys were an example of an animal that were doing just totally fine, and then humans showed up and just fucked up their lives completely, and that they killed them all. So yeah, dodos were endemic to Mauritius, doing perfectly well until Dutch sailors showed up and basically eliminated all of them by the end of the 17th century. So like within a century, they were just completely gone. And that was because before the humans, they had no natural predators, and they were living like it. They're big, like they were larger than turkeys, really slow, flightless birds. They used to like stuff themselves plump like before dry seasons, so they
sounds
would just like
delicious.
weigh themselves down with food. They had their nests in the ground, being flightless, laid only one egg per brood, and those eggs ended up being very tasty to the like pigs and rats and dogs that came over with the humans.
Yeah, rats. I think rats were a big predator for them,
Yeah,
which
yeah.
seems insane.
They themselves were tasty to the sailors, and also everything just outcompeted them for food. So these guys just didn't stand a chance, unfortunately.
There's a.
Oh yeah.
Go ahead.
Oh, but I was just going to say, in terms of the name, it's hypothesized to arrive from the Portuguese. I think it's dodo, but like basically it means like a stupid, like simpleton, like a dumb person. Yeah, it's dodo.
It's interesting. So dodo preceded the bird.
Yeah, it's an actual.
Like
it's an actual
sort
word.
of like
It's a word that I know.
That's interesting.
Yeah. It's a real word that people
I
still
really
say.
I totally thought that was like bird related.
Yeah.
Like almost bird brain.
But that's like
no.
hypothesized though, like in terms of
right.
that being the origin.
So the dodo bird is the exemplar of dodos everywhere. Like,
Well, it's sad because they called them stupid because they weren't afraid of humans, and it's like they never saw you before. Like,
Whenever I hear like ground
Poor guys.
nesting bird, I'm like, oh, that thing's going extinct. That is like the feeling I got when Emily was talking about how like they're fat, slow, delicious, and on the ground.
Yeah.
Also, their eggs are delicious. They're
Yeah.
like also like when you cook them, like their songs cure your cancer or whatever. It's like it's like every possible factor is working towards like these birds are gonna get eaten.
yeah, odds stacked against them. Poor guys. Pour one out for the dodos. Question 3. In another example of humans making a perfectly well-adapted organism decidedly less so, what critter's tendency for positive phototaxis frequently leads to its demise?
oh, moths.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So yes, the answer is moths. And of course, like they demonstrate positive phototaxis in that they gravitate preferentially towards light, and that light can be like electric lights and candles and things that will kill them instantly upon contact. Poor babes. And while we still don't know exactly why this is, there are various theories that have been put forward. I'll mention like a couple that are kind of cool, but basically like their sort of flight paths like towards these lights aren't fully explained by any of the theories that are out there right now. But in terms of sort of some explanations that have been posited, so we suspect that moths evolved to use the moon or stars to like orientate themselves as they're flying through. So basically, like, they can fly in a straight path, like out at night, by keeping, a celestial light source at a constant angle from their eyes. And like in the sky, that stuff is fixed, and they can fly in their straight path and keep it there. It's far away and be fine. But if there's a light that's closer to the ground, then like, it's radiating light in all sorts of directions. So for them to try and like keep that light as they're flying past at a fixed angle from their eye, as they're sort of like adapted to do, then basically that would involve them sort of like spiraling towards it. And then in doing that, they eventually can crash into it. Another potential explanation is that we know that moths experience a phenomenon called dorsal light reaction, which basically just means that from whatever direction light is coming from, their backside, as opposed to their underside, will be facing that same direction. So you can imagine that, like this moon and the stars are above them and they fly as we see them, sure. But if they're faced with the light source in front of or below them, then they would kind of have to dip down to approach that light source to maintain that, and then again kind of crash into it. So poor moths. Again, perfectly fine until we had to show up with fire and electricity. Question 4. What animal's diet of exclusively eucalyptus both necessitates near constant food intake because it's so nutritionally scant, while also potentially poisoning them?
Koalas. Right?
Yeah. Cool. I was going to bring up the fingerprint similarity thing because I always love that fact too.
Wait, what's the fingerprint?
Oh, their fingerprints are very similar to human fingerprints, to an extent that this has never happened. Like, I've seen this fact distorted, and that they're like, there was once a murder crime scene, and they found out that a koala did it, and they thought a koala did it. But like, there are some publications being like, they look very similar to fingerprints left at crime scenes because they just look similar to human fingerprints. But as far as we know, koalas have not committed murder, but I think they kind of have a chance based on that.
They would be like a baby's fingers, though.
Yeah, I mean, can they unlock my phone is like the question I have in my mind right now.
Are you looking
If
for
I'm
help
like
unlocking
feeling
your phone?
lazy,
Grandpa.
and I'm like, I don't understand this technology. Hey, you,
Dude.
whippersnapper, unlock my phone for me.
I really want to go to like a koala sanctuary now and like have one like put a
Set.
fingerprint on my phone.
Right.
So it's like only myself and this one koala can unlock my phone.
That would.
I think it's just that koala.
Unless you
true.
know you have the same fingerprint, which
That would be a great crime premise. Also, it's like the only way
Alibi.
we're gonna lock this phone is traveling around the world to find this specific koala who can get the data we need off of this phone. That's great cybersecurity.
Amazing.
Right
Ooh, I like that. This needs to happen.
that's like the CIA demanding that Apple do it, and Apple's like, the key is the koala. Every Apple phone has a koala finger key.
So yeah, as I mentioned, koalas like eat eucalyptus like exclusively, and there's hardly any nutrition in eucalyptus, which means they have to not only eat a lot of it, but also like macerate and digest it like really, really well to basically wring as many nutrients out of it as possible. So a problem with this is that unlike other marsupials with similarly challenging to chew diets, koalas' teeth aren't really well suited to their life of eucalyptus chopping. So for example, like kangaroos actually can replace older teeth with new sets of teeth over their lifetimes as they wear out. And wombats are in a similar position, but their teeth just never stop growing. So they can kind of replenish themselves and stay sharp that way. But because koalas don't have these similar adaptations, when they get old and their teeth can't macerate eucalyptus as well after a lifetime of chewing, they starve to death because they just can't eat enough and get enough nutrients, and it's really sad. So
I'm just imagining these like old decrepit koalas trying to gum a leaf.
Pretty much.
It's just not working.
Yeah, someone get them a Vitamix. Like, I mean, there has to be another way.
Yeah, Nutribullet would work great for these. Like,
But Another reason why the digestion must happen flawlessly is that, as I mentioned, also eucalyptus has toxins like tannins. And we're actually increasingly learning more about sort of the ability of their gut flora to neutralize these tannins, because when we give koalas antibiotic to treat their chlamydia, which is rampant among koalas, it can actually like destroy their gut flora and make them sick because they can't neutralize these toxins. So yeah, they have a lot of problems. All right, question 5. What undersea critters also suffer dietary troubles, in great part because they have no stomachs, requiring them to constantly eat to stay alive?
What?
So they're...
Undersea critter.
Yes.
No stomachs.
Yeah.
Constantly eat to stay alive.
Is it an animal,
Sorry, I just
Like
an
you
animal, a
could-
vegetable, or a mineral?
This feels a little starfishy. Because they like have a stomach that they stick out and then digest the thing while they're on it, but then they have to like move away.
I was thinking maybe more something like coral or like a sea anemone or something that just is like constantly pumping through. You know what I mean? I don't know if they technically have a stomach.
Gotcha. So it is like a little guy that swims. They have a lot of babies.
Oh,
That's a
it's a
hint.
little guy. It's a little one that swims.
And they have to eat about 3,000 krill a day to not die, which is a lot of krill.
But they're little.
They're...
Is it a minnow?
I've not seen one, but I feel like they're about this big.
Something that big can eat krill?
Krill
I
is
guess,
tiny.
maybe.
Yeah.
Is it a seahorse?
Yeah.
Oh.
Stomachs.
Wow.
Yeah, which I was very surprised by. But yeah, seahorses have no mouth and no stomach. Like, they take in food through their snout. And basically the issue is that, like, it passes through them so quickly. Because, like, one thing your stomach does is, like, basically let food sit around and digest for a while. So you can just slowly,
Right.
continuously absorb stuff from it.
So you're telling me that seahorses are just sucking in krill and popping them out the other side undigested and they just swim off?
Well,
The seahorse like,
Krill
damn
gum.
they're just... there you go.
Passes right through.
Well, they do in some way, but it's not like not for long enough time that they can actually like get a lot of nutrition out of them. So because the food passes so quickly, but so they have to eat 3,000 krill a day, which is tough because they also don't move very quickly. So like they have to kind of be in spots where there's a lot of krill frequently, or else they're just really screwed. And this is especially challenging for the babies when they're first born because they have to like live this life pretty much immediately. So like this combined with like their predation and like humans hunting and harvesting them for like trinkets, and like their susceptibility to exhaustion and like being stranded from ocean storms, they have a really tough time with that. Basically means that like of a brood of 1,000 seahorses, which is like about the standard size, about only 2 of them actually survive
Wow.
to adulthood, which is very small.
I'm shocked a species
0.2%.
could, like, you could bring young into the world with those conditions. That, like, just that diet is krill and unusual.
Okay. I was like, oh, what is this? Yeah.
No, I laughed
Is this
when
a
you were
thoughtful
describing it.
reflection?
I laugh because it is just so absurd. Like I feel like much like the pandas and the koalas, they just like have evolution has created these rules for them that are so unreasonable. It's like you can eat anything, but like before midnight and after 11, and it has to be over the water but under the clouds. And I don't know, it's like, why do we have all these crazy
Yeah.
rules? Why can't I just have a sticky stomach that keeps these krill in? Like, you think evolution would give me this much after all this time? It's,
Yeah.
One of your prey will always tell the truth, but the other prey will always lie.
exactly. Why do we go through this process, evolution?
That was really good.
I'll grant your wish, but
Yes. Speaking of evolutionary struggles feeding into this, question 6. What organism, best known for its incredible physical feats, has been in peril of extinction due to extraordinarily low genetic variability and a silent estrus? The last 2 words in quotes because that's like a concept that has a name, but it's a very strange one.
By physical feats, do you mean they're like little feet?
No, as in like they are capable of amazing physical things. I can give exactly what that is, but I'm going to let you guess maybe a little bit first, because I feel like once I say it, I'll be like, oh.
Like acrobatic feats?
Feats of speed.
Speed feats.
Is it a copepod? Just really,
Rob, it will never be a copepod. I'm sorry.
really like copepods.
I can tell.
If it's speedy feats, is it like cheetahs?
Yes.
Oh, nice.
Achieving speedy feats with their speedy feats.
Speedy feet, yeah.
So apart from like typical extinction pressures, like, you know, humans like infringing on their habitats and hunting them, and climate change, another thing that cheetahs have working against them is that individuals are nearly genetic clones, which is actually pretty wild. There are not many animals that have this going for them. And this is due to a bottlenecking event that occurred about 10,000 to 12,000 years ago, at the end of the last ice age. So basically what that means is that, like, you know, you have a bunch of different individuals in a species, and then something happens that wipes out like a ton of them. And then the pool that's left to mate with each other and reproduce is a lot smaller than what it used to be. And then as you have fewer individuals to mate, then you also have like sort of a smaller gene pool among those remaining individuals.
They're basically British royals.
Yeah, so they inbreed. That's basically, or you have higher degrees of inbreeding is what that means, because they don't have anybody else to mate with. So essentially, in this particular bottleneck, cheetahs in North America and Europe went extinct, leaving behind the species that were in Asia and Africa. Generally speaking, this resulted in extreme inbreeding, and in a good way, this conserved the adaptations that allow for their mad dashing. For example, they have really large livers that allow them to
get fucked up.
Yes, that allow them to use glycogen, which is like a form of like energy storage, so they can like use, you know, like have really quick bursts of energy to fuel their running. They also have like enlarged adrenal glands, lungs, nasal passages, and hearts, so they can take in extra oxygen to fuel their muscles. All sorts of things like that. But these adaptations also have downsides. For example, their fused leg bones, which are also used with their running, make them way less proficient at climbing. Those sort of oversized like respiratory structures that I mentioned take up a lot of room in their skull, so they can't have large teeth, which kind of makes eating a little more tricky for them. And also because of the inbreeding, they're more susceptible to various illnesses. And as a consequence, most cubs actually die before they reach 3 months of age. They have fertility issues, and they can't adapt to environmental change as well. And all of these things together, you know, kind of favor extinction, or make extinction more possible. But because of this, they are also another species of animal that we've tried to sort of like save through captive breeding. And this is where the silent estrus thing comes in. So basically what this means scientifically is that females don't signal when they're ready to mate. And like this is useful for breeders because like they can be like, oh, like she's in heat, let's get a male in here and get her done. But they are just kind of like, excuse me, that's none of your business, which I get. Well, actually, scientists have learned that males can actually be used as sort of like detectors for when females are in heat, and that like they can detect it by like the presence and scent of hormones in the female's urine. So they'll have males in there, and then the male will kind of bark in a particular way, and they're like, oh, that's the alarm. It's go time.
So wait a minute. The cheetahs can tell when the other cheetahs are sexually available. It's just humans who can't tell.
Well, yeah,
that's like literally every animal has silent estrus until we figure it out. Like that's silly.
And they don't exhibit like outward behaviors, which we can kind of like figure out for their animals. For this, is just like a pheromone that only the males can detect.
Yeah, so they exhibit outward behavior that a cheetah can understand. Just not humans.
That's true.
It's lost in translation,
That's very
basically.
True. That's very
I'm
true.
sure, to Noah's point, there are tons of animals that because we're not actively mating them for their survival, we have no idea what their like in heat looks like.
I appreciate that.
Yeah.
Because
like
I have like pollen
business.
allergies, and that's enough about the sex life of wildlife that like I don't need to know anymore. I don't want to know anymore.
Question 7. What animal whose population in the wild is being decimated by a transmissible face cancer gives birth to 50 pups, even though they can only keep 4 of them alive, essentially?
Tasmanian devils.
Yes.
You knew that? I didn't know that.
Yeah, yeah,
Face cancer.
yeah.
It's really interesting. It was in I think it was it was in one of the 2 like 800-page genetic books I just read this summer.
Okay, showing off.
Oh, look at me.
But it was either in, I think it was in Carl Zimmer's She Has Her Mother's Laugh. But it's the story of basically a cancer that is transmitted. Other dogs also experience this, but it's just not as fatal. But Tasmanian devils have this like surface cancer that essentially works like an infectious disease, but it is the cells of a Tasmanian devil that just behave as a cancer. So effectively are external metastasis to other parts of the species. Really wild.
Yeah. And it spreads like by contact. Like they'll touch each other and just like, it's very spooky. Really good Radiolab episode about it also from a very long time ago. But yeah, so Tasmanian devils. And basically a female Tasmanian devil will give birth to about 50 babies, which are known as imps, by the way. Which is just wonderful. Yeah.
That's actually crazy,
Anyways.
though. Like a mammal gives birth to 50 babies. Is that? I mean, that seems exceptional to me. I can't remember thinking of hearing about that.
Well, it's wild, and it makes no sense too because they give birth to 50 in a litter, and then these imps are very tiny, and they actually have to crawl like 3 inches along their mother's stomach to kind of like get to her teats, like from being birthed. There are only 4 teats for all 50 of those babies, and they don't like rotate and share them. It's literally like 4 babies get the teats, and they latch on and hang there for like 3 months, and all the other ones just die.
Wow.
Like that's just how it works every
crazy.
time. Yeah. And it's the kind of thing where it's like that feels like such an energy cost to be like 46 of you just gone. All right, last one. Question 8. What animals, females, so of the species, give birth through a 7-inch long pseudopenis, which is actually their clitoris?
It's hyenas.
Yeah, this was insane to me. Yeah, so all of this comes from the fact that female hyenas actually express really high levels of the hormone testosterone, but this also actually allows them to like make their cubs sort of similarly aggressive and fierce and like more likely to survive because they sort of give this hormone boost of testosterone and androgen as well to their cubs. So kind of a cool thing. But unfortunately, having sort of like this preponderance of male sex hormones does complicate their reproduction in some ways. So the androgen that they kind of gain from their own moms actually damages their ovaries and makes them and like creates some infertility issues. Additionally, mating is difficult because males have to navigate that 7-inch long clitoris / pseudopenis, and it grows that way because of the testosterone, which is wild. But it's kind of difficult to inseminate that. But even worse, when they give birth, it is also through that clitoris. So that thing is 1 inch in diameter, and they have to push multiple 2-pound cubs through it. And basically, it frequently tears. So like in particular, first-time mothers can die from that. Cubs also frequently will suffocate in the process because it just can take a long time for them to make it out. So actually 60% of hyena cubs die during birth, which is really high.
Wow.
Yeah. So I feel like actually for a lot of example of these, you sort of have these kind of double-edged adaptations where it's like, oh, like this particular thing, you know, allowed this animal to thrive in this way, but was a detriment to its fitness in this way. And then you have all the animals that just eat leaves that make no sense. But that being said, I hope that this quiz was kind of sort of I think it can be viewed as kind of some kind of encouragement where it's like, you know, if all these critters working with what they have, which is perhaps not a whole lot, can like make it through the day, then maybe we can too. At least we're not trying to eat eucalyptus and not chew it.
But I feel like they can't make it through the day. Isn't that what we've learned?
They make it through enough to continue existing.
That's true. I guess I can do that.
Perhaps barely, but there you go. So yeah, exactly. Like now, like any accomplishment is like, well, I like, a koala can't do that. Hey, like I did. Anyways, great job, guys. That's all we have for today. Thanks so much, André, for joining us. It was a pleasure to have you on and learn all about thermal vents and whale falls and what Soylent Green is.
It's people. It's people.
I'll never forget. But yeah, where can our listeners find you and all the cool stuff that you do if they want to check on you after the show?
Sure. So I'm on Twitter at Dre the Scientist. That's about it for now. When life resumes post pandemic, then maybe we'll do more live shows and stuff like that.
Absolutely, and we'll definitely share them so everybody can check them out. Not if, when that happens. That is the stance that I'm at. Nice. And that goes for your regular hosts as well. If you'd like to check out more content from us, you can also find us on Twitter and on Instagram at FaxMachinePod and on Facebook at FaxMachinePodcast. We're also on Twitter individually. I'm at _EM Costa. Noah.
At Arcs and Sciences.
And Rob.
At Sweatervest SCI.
Fax Machine is produced by Rob Frawley, Noah Giberson, and Emily Costa, with editing by Noah Giberson. The theme music is by AC Antonelli, and our logo was designed by Mike Sola. See you next time. Bye!
Bye.